Today's reading will be from Matthew chapter 14, verses 22 to 36. Jesus walks on the water. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. After he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. Later that night, he was there alone, and the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I, don't be afraid." "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," he said. Then Peter got out of the boat, walked on the water, and came to Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and, beginning to sink, cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You of little faith," he said, "why did you doubt?" And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." When they had crossed over, they landed at Gennesaret. And when the men of that place recognized Jesus, they sent word to all the surrounding country. People brought all their sick to him and begged him to let the sick just touch the edge of his cloak, and all who touched it were healed. Now, my message to you is, don't stay in the boat when God is calling you to step out in the water. Sometimes there are times when God is telling you to go over to the other side. Is God telling you to leave some group of people and cross over to the other side? What are you looking at? The waves, the storms? They are supposed to be there at their appointed time. Why? So that you will know that Jesus is Lord, even of the storms and waves we see around us. They are also allowed by God so as to perfect you. What is your boat? Your boat is your livelihood, your job, your means of sustenance, just as it was for Peter and the disciples. As Jesus walked on water, the other disciples thought that he was a ghost, but Peter recognized him, and he knows that it is safer with Jesus out of the boat than in the boat without Jesus. I can hear the other disciples say, "But Peter, you can't walk on water. But Peter, you may sink. Peter, you may have nothing to sustain you. You'll get wet. It's impossible. It's foolish." We often condemn Peter because in his following Jesus, he takes his eyes off him and began to sink. Peter had a lapse of faith, so he sank. Jesus asked him, "Why do you doubt, O ye of little faith?" Often we condemn Peter for his lack of faith, but let's give Peter some credit. At least he got out of the boat. The rest of the disciples stayed in the boat. If Peter had little faith, then the other disciples had no faith at that time. Is God asking you to step out of your boat? Unless you step out of the boat, you will never know what it's like to walk on water. Change is not easy. To stay in the same boat is easy. At least Peter got out of the boat. What about the other disciples? They didn't. Do we also stay in the boat without realizing the fullness of what God has for us in our lives? When fear takes hold of us, we usually turn to something that makes us feel safe, even if it's not God. There will be many storms in our lives, that is for sure, but we should look to Jesus, the author and finisher of our story, because if he would see us sink, he would immediately save us. Nobody walks perfectly on water. Everyone sinks, but God is there to pull us up.